Beneath Central Parkway in Cincinnati, Ohio, 2.2 miles of perfectly engineered subway tunnels sit in darkness. 4 underground stations with mosaic tilework and vaulted ceilings wait silently. The tunnels are structurally sound, the platforms are intact, the ventilation systems still function. For nearly a century, these passages have been ready to receive trains that will never come, and passengers who will never arrive. This is not an abandoned system, it is an unfinished one. From 1920 to 1928, Cincinnati spent what would be equivalent to over $180 million in today's money building what should have become one of America's pioneering rapid transit networks. Then they stopped. Not because of disaster or collapse, but because of something far more mundane. They ran out of money at exactly the wrong moment in history. The Cincinnati subway represents one of the most complete failures in American infrastructure history. Not a failure of engineering. The construction was exceptional. Not a failure of vision. The plan was sound. But a failure of timing, politics, and economic reality that left behind the largest unused subway system in the United States. Every city that built subways in the early 20th century faced obstacles. Only Cincinnati gave up with the tunnels already dug. What makes this story remarkable is not what went wrong, but how close Cincinnati came to getting it right. The decisions made between 1916 and 1929 didn't just kill a transit project. They fundamentally altered the trajectory of an American city that once ranked among the nation's 10 largest. This is the story of the tunnels beneath Cincinnati, and the city that might have been. Well, the Miami and Erie Canal opened in 1825, connecting Cincinnati to Lake Erie through 274 miles of waterway. For 2 decades, it was vital infrastructure. Canal boats carried grain, whiskey, pork, and lumber south to the Ohio River. They brought manufactured goods and passengers north toward the Great Lakes. The canal made Cincinnati wealthy. By 1850, railroads had made canals obsolete. The Miami and Erie continued operating, but traffic declined steadily. The canal that had once been Cincinnati's lifeline became its embarrassment. The water grew stagnant. Industries dumped waste into it. Residents used it as an open sewer. The canal cut through the heart of Cincinnati like an infected wound, dividing the downtown business district from the residential neighborhood of Over the Rhine to the north. In 1877, Cincinnati officially abandoned the canal. The water was drained, leaving behind a muddy ditch that bred mosquitoes and disease. The canal bed became a dumping ground for refuse. Children played in the filth. The stench was unbearable in summer. For 40 years, this unusable strip of land ran through downtown Cincinnati, and nobody could agree on what to do with it. On September 15, 1883, a weekly magazine called The Graphic published an illustration showing something revolutionary: trains running underground through the old canal bed, with a beautiful boulevard built on top. The idea was ahead of its time. Cincinnati's streetcar system was still horse-drawn. The first electric streetcar wouldn't arrive until 1888, but the seed was planted. By 1912, Cincinnati had a problem. The city had grown to over 360,000 people, making it the 7th largest in America. Electric streetcars provided public transportation, but the system was overwhelmed. 222 miles of streetcar tracks crisscrossed the city, yet trips from downtown to the suburbs routinely took 45 minutes to an hour. Streetcars shared crowded streets with horse-drawn carriages, early automobiles, and pedestrians. Collisions happened daily. The city was in gridlock. In March 1912, city officials appointed a board to study rapid transit options. They hired a Chicago transit planner who proposed an ambitious solution: a 16-mile loop combining underground, at-grade, and elevated rail. The system would run beneath downtown through the old canal bed, surface at Brighton, continue through the Mill Creek Valley to St Bernard and Norwood, then return to downtown along the Ohio River on an elevated railway. The estimated cost was $12 million. It was an enormous sum, but Cincinnati was a wealthy city with a bright future. The plan made sense. Rapid transit would ease congestion, connect neighbourhoods, support continued growth, and finally put the abandoned canal to productive use. Then, something unusual happened. The planners revised the cost downward to $6 million. This wasn't based on new efficiencies or better estimates. It was political expediency. A $12 million bond issue seemed too expensive to voters. A $6 million version might pass. The revised plan covered 11 miles instead of 16, with most of the expensive connections eliminated. Critical links were deferred to future expansion. On April 17, 1917, Cincinnati voters approved the $6 million bond issue by a margin of more than 2-1. Newspapers endorsed it unanimously. Business organizations supported it. Labor unions backed it. The Cincinnati Commercial Tribune declared, "We believe that the city we love, our home, deserves the best in modern transportation." The problem was timing. America entered World War I on April 6, 1917, 11 days before the bond vote. Construction could not begin during wartime. Materials were unavailable. Labor was scarce. Costs were already rising. By the time the war ended in November 1918, inflation had devastated the bond's purchasing power. Construction materials that cost $1 in 1916 now cost $2 or more. The $6 million that should have built 11 miles of rapid transit could now barely cover 7 miles of basic infrastructure. Track, signals, electrical systems and rolling stock would require additional funding that didn't exist. The Rapid Transit Commission faced a choice: abandon the project or proceed with inadequate funding and hope to raise more money later. They chose hope. On January 28, 1920, the first steam shovel bit into the old canal bed at the intersection of Walnut Street and Central Parkway. After years of delays, Cincinnati's subway was finally under construction. The engineering plan was clever. The old canal provided a ready-made right-of-way through downtown, eliminating expensive land acquisition. The canal bed was already excavated to a depth that worked for subway construction. Using this route minimized disruption to surface streets. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that made the 1883 graphic proposal so brilliant. Construction moved forward in sections. Contract 1 covered the underground portion, from downtown northward beneath what would become Central Parkway. This was the critical section, 2.2 miles of twin tunnels with 4 underground stations. Contractors dug through the old canal bed, building concrete-lined tunnels designed to last centuries. The 4 underground stations were Race Street, Liberty Street, Brighton Place and Lynn Street. Each featured island platforms, vaulted ceilings and mosaic tilework. The design drew inspiration from Boston's early subway system, one of the few American precedents available. The stations weren't elaborate, but they were solid and functional. By early 1923, the 2.2-mile underground section was complete. The tunnels were perfect. The stations were ready. It was impressive work, finished on schedule despite post-war material shortages. Above-ground construction continued through 1927. 3 additional stations were built at Ludlow Avenue, Clifton and Marshall, where the line would have emerged from the tunnel and continued north. 7 miles of right-of-way were graded or partially constructed following the old canal route toward Norwood. But 2 critical problems became impossible to ignore. First, no track had been laid anywhere. The tunnel sat empty. The stations had platforms but no rails. Installing track, signals, electrical systems and purchasing rail cars would require several $1 million that weren't in the budget. Second, the system had no connections. The rapid transit loop was supposed to link downtown to surrounding neighbourhoods in a continuous circuit. Instead, construction had produced disconnected segments, tunnels downtown, graded right-of-way to the north, but crucial links missing. Without those connections, the completed sections were useless. The Rapid Transit Commission estimated finishing the loop would require an additional $9 to $10 million, effectively doubling the original budget. They had spent $6 million and created infrastructure that couldn't function without spending $9 million more. Construction slowed through 1927 as funding evaporated. By early 1928, work stopped entirely. The rapid transit system sat incomplete, with no clear path forward. Political opposition had been building for years. Residents along the route complained about blasting damage to their properties. Brighton residents delayed construction for 2 months in 1922, demanding compensation for cracked foundations and broken windows. Neighbouring cities of Norwood and St Bernard negotiated endlessly over route details, adding more than a year of delays. State examiners questioned the Rapid Transit Commission's financial records. Newspapers began running articles critical of the project. The tight curves in some tunnel sections, among the sharpest in American subway design, became fodder for opponents who claimed the system could never operate safely at speed. Into this chaos came Murray Seasongood. Murray Seasongood was born in Cincinnati in 1878 to a wealthy family. He graduated from Harvard University and Harvard Law School, then returned to Cincinnati to practice law. By the 1920s, he had become frustrated with the city's notoriously corrupt government. Cincinnati was controlled by a Republican political machine inherited from George Cox, the notorious Boss Cox, who had dominated the city until his death in 1916. Cox's successor, Rudolf Heinecker, ran the machine from New York while maintaining total control of Cincinnati politics through patronage, intimidation, and vote manipulation. On October 9, 1923, Seasongood delivered a speech to the Cincinnatus Association that newspapers called the shot heard round the wards. He attacked the machine's fiscal irresponsibility. They tell you at City Hall that they have no money. What I want to know is, what becomes of the money? We have the 4th largest per capita expenditure of any city in the country. What do we get for it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Seasongood founded the City Charter Committee and led a reform movement to break the boss's control. In 1924, voters approved a new city charter that reorganized government, eliminated patronage through civil service reform, and created a council-manager administration. Cincinnati became the first large American city with this progressive structure. In November 1925, Seasongood and other Charter Party candidates swept the first election under the new system. His council colleagues elected him as the city's first mayor under the reformed government. He served from 1926 to 1930. Seasongood was brilliant, incorruptible, and committed to fiscal responsibility. He was also deeply skeptical of the rapid transit project. He saw it as exactly the kind of mismanaged, over-budget boondoggle that represented everything wrong with the old political system. In January 1929, Mayor Seasongood dissolved the Rapid Transit Commission. He transferred control of the subway project to his own office. It was effectively a death sentence. Seasongood had no intention of spending millions more on a project he viewed as a monument to political incompetence. The timing could not have been worse. In October 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. Any possibility of raising additional funding disappeared. Cincinnati faced collapsing tax revenues and massive unemployment. Spending $9 million to complete a subway system became unthinkable. In October 1928, before the crash, the city opened Central Parkway on top of the subway tunnels. It was a compromise solution. The expensive underground infrastructure would at least support a surface boulevard. Central Parkway became a major thoroughfare through downtown Cincinnati, and it remains one today. The subway tunnels beneath it were sealed and forgotten. What happened to Cincinnati's subway after 1929 is a story of missed opportunities and increasingly desperate proposals. During World War II, city officials considered converting the tunnels into air raid shelters. One station, Liberty Street, was actually outfitted with bunk beds, ventilation improvements, and emergency supplies. Old photographs show the Cold War-era shelter configuration still intact decades later. The conversion was never completed. The tunnels were deemed too vulnerable to flooding. In the late 1940s, a comprehensive study concluded the subway should be mothballed permanently. Post-war America was embracing automobiles and highways. Public transit seemed outdated. The future belonged to cars. In the 1950s, Cincinnati installed a 52-inch water main in the southbound tunnel. This saved approximately $300,000 by avoiding the need to dig a new tunnel for the pipeline. The water main is still there, complicating any future transit use. Relocating it would cost an estimated $14 million. In the 1960s, Interstate 75 was constructed through Cincinnati, destroying the above-ground portions of the subway route. The 3 surface stations at Ludlow, Clifton, and Marshall were demolished. The graded right-of-way north of the tunnels disappeared beneath the highway. Only the underground section survived. Various private proposals emerged over the decades. In the 1970s, broadcaster Nick Clooney proposed converting sections into an underground shopping mall and nightclub. Insurance issues killed the idea. A wine storage company wanted to use the tunnels as climate-controlled cellars. Building code problems stopped that plan. Hollywood filmmakers scouted the tunnels for movies. No major production ever used them. In 2002, Cincinnati voters considered a half-cent sales tax increase to fund a $2.6 billion regional light rail system that would have used the existing tunnels. The proposal was defeated 2-1. Voters saw it as the 1916 subway scheme reborn. Expensive, risky, and likely to fail. In 2008, the city commissioned an engineering study to determine the tunnel's condition and options for the future. The findings were revealing. The tunnels were in good shape and strikingly well preserved. Nearly 80 years after construction stopped, the infrastructure remained structurally sound. The study presented 3 options. Maintain the tunnels as is for $2.6 million over 5 years, fill them with dirt for $19 million, or revive them for modern subway use for $100.5 million plus $14 million to relocate the water main. Cincinnati chose the cheapest option, minimal maintenance and continued inaction. Between 2008 and 2016, the Cincinnati Museum Center offered occasional tours of the tunnels. Tickets cost around $50 and sold out quickly. Tour groups descended into the underground stations, walking through spaces frozen in time. The mosaic tile work was intact. The vaulted ceilings showed minimal deterioration. The platforms waited as they had waited for decades. In 2016, tours were suspended due to safety concerns. The floors were uneven. The water main leaked continuously. Liability insurance became prohibitively expensive. The tunnels were sealed again. Today, the Cincinnati subway serves 2 purposes. It supports Central Parkway from below, preventing ground subsidence, and it carries a water main and fiber optic cables. These mundane functions are all that remain of Cincinnati's grand vision. The 4 underground stations still exist unchanged since 1923. Race Street Station was designed as the system's hub. It features an island platform with 3 tracks and expansion stubs for future connections. The curves beyond the station are among the tightest in American subway history. a design flaw that would have limited operating speeds. The station's mosaic work remains visible on the walls, geometric patterns in cream and brown tile. Liberty Street Station gained new life during the Cold War when it was partially converted into a fallout shelter. Cinder block partitions created small rooms. Emergency lighting was installed. Storage cans for survival supplies sat on the platform. Ventilation equipment was upgraded. Then the conversion was abandoned, leaving the station in a hybrid state. Part 1920s subway platform, part 1960s shelter. Brighton Place Station is the most accessible to view from above. The tunnel portals are visible from Interstate 75 near the Harrison Avenue exit. Concrete archways frame the darkness beyond. Graffiti covers the visible sections, but the structure itself is sound. This was the last underground station before the system would have emerged to run above ground toward Norwood. Lynn Street Station is the most obscure. It was completely bricked up and sealed. Even during the museum tours, this station was rarely accessible. It exists behind concrete walls, its platform hidden from view. The tunnels themselves are remarkable pieces of engineering. Twin tubes run parallel beneath Central Parkway, each large enough for a single track. The concrete walls are 2 feet thick. The vaulted ceilings rise 15 feet above the rails that were never laid. Every 500 feet, cross passages connect the 2 tunnels for emergency access and ventilation. The construction quality explains why the tunnels survive in excellent condition after a century. The concrete was properly mixed and poured. The waterproofing was effective. The ventilation was designed to handle the exhaust from electric trains and still functions adequately for air circulation. Cincinnati's Rapid Transit Commission may have failed to complete the system, but they didn't fail at building tunnels. Urban explorers have infiltrated the subway over the decades despite official prohibitions. Their photographs reveal what official tours never showed. Construction equipment left behind in the 1920s, wheelbarrows rusting in alcoves, electrical wire spools abandoned in side passages, handwritten construction notes still legible on walls. The acoustics are strange. The concrete chambers create unnatural reverb. Footsteps echo for seconds. Whispers carry farther than they should. Some explorers report hearing their own voices bounce back from distant sections of tunnel, creating an eerie sense of being followed. The homeless have occasionally sheltered in the tunnels, though access is difficult. College students from the University of Cincinnati have snuck in as a rite of passage for engineering majors. One group in the 1980s recalls stumbling upon Cold War-era provisions in Liberty Street Station. The bunk beds, the storage cans, the emergency lighting, and realizing they'd found a fragment of Cincinnati's nuclear age anxiety preserved underground. The city maintains the tunnels because Central Parkway sits on top of them. If the tunnels collapsed, the boulevard would collapse. Annual inspections ensure structural integrity. The water main is monitored for leaks. The fibre optic cables are maintained by telecommunications companies. But no one seriously proposes using the tunnels for their intended purpose. In 2024, a new round of proposals emerged. 18 different concepts were submitted to the city, ranging from underground art galleries to stormwater management systems to data center cooling facilities. The ideas were creative, but all shared the same fundamental problem: tens of millions of dollars in cost with no clear revenue stream. The Cincinnati subway will likely remain unused. The infrastructure is there, the stations are intact, but the political will, the funding mechanism, and the demographic need all remain absent. Cincinnati is not growing. The metropolitan area has actually lost population since 1970. Building expensive public transit for a shrinking city makes no economic sense. The failure of Cincinnati's subway changed the city's trajectory in ways that are difficult to quantify but easy to observe. Had the system opened in 1925 as originally planned, Cincinnati would have joined Boston, New York and Philadelphia as cities with extensive rapid transit. Neighborhoods along the route would have developed differently. Norwood, St. Bernard and Oakley would have become connected to downtown by fast, reliable rail service. Suburban sprawl would have been moderated. The city's population might have stabilized rather than declined. Instead, Cincinnati became an automobile city. Interstate 75 and other highways carved through neighborhoods, demolishing historic buildings and dividing communities. The expressway system that destroyed the above-ground portions of the subway route also accelerated suburban flight. Middle-class families moved to outlying areas, the urban core hollowed out. By 1970, Cincinnati had fallen from 7th to 29th largest American city. Other cities made different choices. Cleveland built a rapid transit system. So did Chicago, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco. These cities retained denser urban cores and slower suburban sprawl. Public transit supported continued downtown development. Cincinnati chose highways and sprawl. The subway's failure also became a cautionary tale within Cincinnati politics. For generations, any proposal for major public investment was met with skepticism. Remember the subway became shorthand for government incompetence and fiscal irresponsibility. The 2002 light rail proposal died partly because voters remembered what happened in the 1920s. There's a deeper lesson in Cincinnati's subway that extends beyond one city's infrastructure failure. The project was technically feasible. The engineering was sound, the vision made sense. What failed was timing. The bond issue passed in 1917, weeks after America entered World War I. Construction began in 1920, at the peak of post-war inflation. The project ran out of money in 1927, 2 years before the Great Depression. If the bond vote had occurred in 1920 instead of 1917, or if construction had somehow finished by 1925, the system might have opened before the economic collapse. But that's not what happened. Cincinnati made a series of reasonable decisions that collided with historical forces beyond local control. World War I, post-war inflation, political reform and the Great Depression combined to kill a project that should have succeeded. The tunnels remain as evidence of what might have been. 2.2 miles of perfect infrastructure, waiting silently beneath Central Parkway. 4 underground stations with mosaic tilework and vaulted ceilings, ready to serve passengers who will never arrive. A water main and fibre optic cables where electric trains should run. Cincinnati built a subway system and then stopped, leaving behind the largest abandoned transit network in America. Not because of disaster or incompetence, but because history intervened at exactly the wrong moment. The tunnels are a monument to ambition interrupted, to vision deferred, to the cruel mathematics of timing. Every city that built early rapid transit systems faced obstacles. New York struggled with corruption and cost overruns. Boston dealt with engineering challenges. Chicago navigated political battles. They all persevered. Cincinnati gave up with the finish line in sight. The subway beneath Cincinnati is not a ghost. Ghosts are remnants of things that once lived. The Cincinnati subway never lived. It was born incomplete and has remained incomplete for a century. The tunnels are not haunted by the past. They're haunted by the future that never arrived. Central Parkway carries traffic above the tunnels every day. Thousands of cars pass over the forgotten infrastructure below. Most drivers have no idea what lies beneath them. The largest unused subway system in the United States, waiting in darkness, perfect and useless and silent.